Hey guys, this is Mr. V over here. I'll be doing a book review today for Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub. Before I get into the book review, I want you guys to know that I try to do a spoiler-free book review, and that's why if you see me looking down occasionally, I just have some notes so I don't give you guys any spoilers. So, for this book review, Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub. This is the sequel to The Talisman, which was also written by those authors. Black House is basically about Jack Sawyer, and it's about 20 years later after The Talisman, and he was at this point he was on the LAPD. He had solved many murders, and he just feels burned out. He just doesn't want to continue working anymore. He just wants a simpler lifestyle, and he decides to move from LA and move to Wisconsin and just be over there. And then when he goes there, there is actually a serial killer, and they're hoping that he will help solve the case. So that is what Black House is about. Now, before I continue with my book review, one thing you guys should know is that I have read many Stephen King books. I've read over 30 of his books. But I would say that this is the most gruesome of his books. So be very careful when reading it. If you guys cannot take that, I wouldn't even recommend this book. I felt this has a great story, but I wouldn't recommend it if you guys can't take it. An example is like the way in which people are killed is very graphic, in that this serial killer, he preys on little kids and he kills the kids, but then he also eats part of them, which is, very gross. And the also fight scenes, anything like that, go pretty far in depth. Like when there's fight scenes among townsmen, if someone stabs someone, they go pretty far in depth. So it's very intense, and that's why if you guys can't handle that, do not read this book. So I'm going to continue with the Black House book review. Make sure that you guys read The Talisman before you read this, because there are people online think that you thought that you didn't have to read The Talisman first, because if you go to the bookstore and just go through a few pages, you may think it has no relation to The Talisman with the exception of Jack Sawyer. Or even if you get a sample, if you download a sample, you'd think it has no relation, because about the first third of the book has like absolutely nothing to do with The Talisman with the exception of Jack Sawyer. But about 30-40% into the book, he starts going to the territories, and he opens up a lot more about that, and you definitely want to know about that. So make sure you guys read The Talisman before, as that does play a big factor. So let me talk purely about Black House. I felt, this was a very good book. I thought that he set up right from the beginning. He set up the town well, the descriptions. He set all the scenes up very well. There were some people online who felt it was slow moving in the beginning. I can see where they're coming from to an extent. I can see it is a little slower moving, because as I said, you can't tell that it is the sequel to The Talisman until about 35-40% into the book. But there are still a lot of things going on in between that time, especially the murders that are going on in between the time, and they're setting up who the people are. So, I can see why some people thought it was slower moving, especially because this is like about a 650-page book. So some people I read quit after like 20-25%. I would not recommend that, because it does pick up speed a lot. But there is the one thing I did not like about the beginning was they just threw all the characters at you at once. They basically did that, and that was very difficult in the beginning. I know in any book you're going to be given a lot of characters, but they just threw it all at once. If you read just the first chapter or two chapters, you learn all of them, and then it makes you forget some of the characters, because then you think, oh, is this the policeman? Is this the town's crazy man? Is this the guy in the hospital? And it's like they just throw it all at once, and then they slowly give the stories of each of those people more and more. But when you're given all the names at once, it can be difficult in the beginning. Of course, you get to know them after a little while, but it just takes that was one thing I didn't like about the beginning. But one thing they both did phenomenally from the beginning is giving you that intensity as it makes you continually wonder who is the murderer. You learn about the different townsmen, but you are always wondering who is this murderer? Who, who can you trust? Who do you really believe? Who don't you believe? As many of the townsmen seem like you may not believe certain things about them, and it's just things like that. And they set that up right from the beginning. So that's a lot of fun, and I think there was a very nice build-up in this book. I felt there was a great pacing to the book. Some people thought it was slow moving. I thought it wasn't that slow moving, but after the beginning, others agreed that even the ones that thought it was slow moving, after the beginning, they said that it picks up speed very quickly, and it does. So that's, I thought it was a very nice pace, and because it was also like consistently kind of creepy, because of you heard about the murders or the serial killer, it's consistently creepy, but it's also consistently mysterious, as you will find out one thing and then it makes you wonder about something else, or you'll find out someone did something, then it makes you wonder about someone else, and you're just continually wondering all these things, which make you want to continue. So it was a lot of fun in those regards. Now, the one of the complaints I have, and this is somewhat of a big complaint I have, is in the last like 15% of the book, there were some parts where I felt they could have cut down. It did feel like there was a part that dragged a little too much. Not much, but it did feel like it dragged too much to where they could have cut some of the stuff out a bit in the last like 15% mark. But there was also one element in the last 15% that I did not like. And I can't say what it is, but the reason I didn't like it is it just made no sense. It felt like the authors didn't know what to do and they just decided to throw something in there. Maybe I missed something, but I don't think that's the case. I think they just didn't know what to do and they just threw something in there. And that's why I said one element didn't make sense. It's not the end didn't make sense. The end made perfect sense. But there was one element that made no sense. So, um, that was just at the very end, like towards in like the last 15%, but that was only for a small portion. Um, because most of the end was great. Because I also thought this had an amazing ending. It was, just an amazing ending, and that it wrapped the story up nicely. There will be some people that say one element they did not like about the end. But it wrapped it up amazingly, and it's one of those things that when it can bring like a mix of emotions, that is a great end. And it like brings a whole mix of emotions at the end. And that's why I still thought it was an amazing ending. Now, one thing I did not mention in the book review yet, which I want to talk about right now, is how much this links to the Dark Tower. I am currently reading the Dark Tower series, and I have just finished book 6 of the Dark Tower series. There are 7 books for those who do not know. There's 7. So I've just finished book 6. And I can see there's a heavy, heavy link to the Dark Tower. But it should be noted that you don't need to have read the Dark Tower series to enjoy this book. This can be a standalone novel read right after The Talisman, and you can still enjoy it a lot. But if you are reading the Dark Tower, it is way better. Because also there are things that, because there are heavy references, there are things they mention in the book, like what breakers, the tower will fall, the beams, Ka. All that stuff they explain in the book, but they give a brief explanation. Whereas if you're already reading the Dark Tower, you know it a lot more in depth, and then it just makes the book way better. But again, I need to reiterate, you don't have to be reading or have read the Dark Tower to enjoy this, because it can still be just a standalone novel and you still enjoy it. But what else is really cool is he links a lot to other books. It's not just the Dark Tower, but a lot of these other books link to the Dark Tower. Some of the books that they link to are Little Sisters of Eloria, Everything's Eventual, Low Men in Yellow Coats, possibly Eyes of the Dragon, Insomnia, and those are just some of the ones that I wrote down immediately. It's like they link to different parts, and a perfect example is if you've read the novella Low Men in Yellow Coats, one of the main characters' name is Ted Brodigan. and his name is mentioned at one point, and they just mention it. And if you have read Low Men in Yellow Coats and know who he is, it like blows your mind. If you didn't read it, you kind of just shrug the shoulders. You don't think anything of the name. But it's just like if you've read it, then it like blows your mind, and that's why it can be pretty crazy if you've read some of those other novels. But again, let me stress, you don't have to have read any of those other novels. Just read The Talisman and this, and you will be fine, and you still will enjoy the book. But if you are reading the other ones, it makes it just crazier. So I'm going to rate it right now. I always rate mine on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 is an awful book, a 5 is average, and a 10 is phenomenal. Like, make that your next read type of phenomenal. Very few reach it to the 0 category, just as very few reach it to the 10. Because I'm a pretty tough critic. That is hard to even move up 0.5 points. And again, a 5 is average. But I'm going to give this 2 reviews. I'm going to give a review for people who have not or are not reading the Dark Tower series, and I'm going to give it for people who are or have read the Dark Tower series. So, again, this review is for people who have not read the Dark Tower series. I would give this book, with a 5 being average, I would give this book a 6.5, which is fairly high in my rating, because I said I'm a very tough critic. But I would still rate this pretty good because they did a good consistency throughout, a pace, they had a good storyline, they had you wondering a lot of things, it had a great end. There was many things that I still really enjoyed about it. So I would still rate it a 6.5 if you are not reading The Dark Tower, which again in my ratings is very high. Now, if you are reading The Dark Tower or have read The Dark Tower, I would rate this book an 8. And again, I'm a very tough critic, and I would rate this an 8. I almost rated it an 8.5, but I decided that's too high, that I'm going to rate it a solid 8, because the book is already enjoyable. But if you're reading The Dark Tower, there's so many links that, for those who are reading it, can understand some of the things I just said. So there are so many links, and there's so much extra if you are reading it. And that's why if you are reading the Dark Tower series, make sure you read Black House, because it links so heavily to it. And again, I'm a tough critic, so an 8 is very, very high. The other thing I would say for those who are reading the Dark Tower, I would not recommend reading this until you've read at least book 4 or 5 of the Dark Tower, because if you read it in the beginning, if you read it after book 2 or 3, you won't get as much of a connection to it. So anyway, if you guys disagree with any of my comments or my review, please comment below. I hope you guys click the subscribe button. Thank you for watching the book review. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy your reading.